A homeless black boy saves the life of a pregnant millionaire. Years later, she changed his life. The night exploded in a symphony of destruction as a drunk driver's truck became a missile of death, slamming into Cassie Lane's car at 60 miles per hour. The smell of gasoline mixed with blood filled the air. Steam hissed like a serpent, warning of imminent death. This pregnant woman had maybe 60 seconds before her car became her crematorium. That's when a voice shattered the deadly quiet. Not the voice of a trained paramedic or firefighter, but the voice of a 15-year-old homeless boy who was about to make a choice that would change 2 lives forever. Lady, can you hear me? Roman Taylor didn't hesitate. He dropped his backpack, which contained everything he owned in the world, and ran straight toward what looked like certain death. This kid, who had been sleeping on the streets and scrounging for his next meal, was now the only thing standing between a stranger and a horrific death. But here's what Roman didn't know as he raced toward that burning car. He wasn't just saving any stranger. He was about to save his own mother. The woman who had been told 15 years ago that her baby boy had died at birth, when in reality, he had been stolen from her and thrown into a system that had failed him over and over again. Roman's small hands gripped the twisted door handle, pulling with all his might. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he could see her. Cassie Lane, 35 years old, 7 months pregnant, and unconscious. Blood streamed down her face from a gash on her forehead, and her swollen belly was pressed dangerously against the steering wheel. This homeless boy, who owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a silver bracelet around his wrist, faced an impossible choice. He could run to safety, preserve his own life, and let this stranger face her fate. Or he could risk everything, his life, his future, everything he had left, for a woman he'd never met. The fire crackled louder. Time was running out. The heat was unbearable now, burning Roman's eyebrows as he pulled desperately at the door. His small frame shook with the effort, but the metal wouldn't budge. Inside the car, Cassie's breathing was shallow, her face pale from blood loss, and her unborn daughter's life hung in the balance. What would you do in Roman's position? Would you risk everything for a stranger? Or would survival instinct take over? Let me know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take turns you never saw coming. Roman looked around frantically and spotted a large rock near the ditch. Without hesitation, he grabbed it and smashed it against the passenger window. Glass shards flew everywhere, cutting his hands, but he didn't stop. He cleared away the jagged pieces and crawled through the window into the smoke-filled car. The interior was like a furnace. Roman's lungs burned with every breath, and he could barely see through the thick smoke. But he could hear Cassie's labored breathing, and he knew she was still alive. He had to get her out before the car became her tomb. Inside the smoke-filled car, Roman could barely breathe, and swimming in clothes 3 sizes too big, crawled through the shattered passenger window with a determination that defied his size. His backpack, containing everything he owned in the world, lay forgotten on the asphalt outside. This wasn't just any homeless child. Roman Taylor was a survivor who had learned to navigate the streets with an intelligence and courage that most adults never develop. In his pocket, he carried a worn notebook filled with sketches of buildings he dreamed of designing someday. Around his wrist, he wore a simple silver bracelet, the only connection to a past he couldn't remember and a mother he'd never known. The woman trapped beside him was his complete opposite. Cassie Lane came from a world of privilege that Roman had never experienced. Her designer clothes, now torn and bloodied, told the story of wealth and opportunity. Expensive jewelry caught the light from the flames, a stark contrast to her current helpless state. Scattered across the dashboard were photos that had fallen from her purse, images of art galleries, college friends, and a life filled with possibilities. But at this moment, none of that mattered. Roman saw only a pregnant woman who needed help, and he wasn't about to let her die on his watch. The heat was overwhelming, and Roman's small hands were already cut and bleeding from the broken glass. But he spotted Cassie's seatbelt, twisted and holding her trapped against the steering wheel. Using a sharp piece of glass like a knife, he began sawing through the thick fabric. come on," he whispered to himself, his young voice steady despite the chaos around him. The flames were creeping closer, and he could feel the intense heat on his back. Finally, the seatbelt gave way. Now came the impossible part. The boy somehow had to pull an unconscious pregnant woman from a twisted car wreck. Roman positioned himself behind Cassie, wrapped his small arms around her shoulders, and began to pull. It should have been impossible. Roman probably weighed less than 100 pounds soaking wet. But sometimes, in moments of life and death, the human spirit finds strength that defies all logic. Inch by inch, he dragged Cassie toward the passenger window. Just as he managed to get her halfway out, the car's fuel tank erupted behind them. The explosion threw them both clear of the wreckage, and Roman instinctively covered Cassie's pregnant belly with his own body as debris rained down around them. When the smoke cleared, Roman immediately grabbed his phone, a broken device he'd found in a dumpster but had managed to get working. With shaking hands, he dialed 911. 911? There's been a bad accident on Maple Street. A pregnant lady is hurt real bad. She's bleeding everywhere, and I think she's gonna die if you don't hurry. As sirens wailed in the distance, Cassie's eyes fluttered open. Her face was pale, blood streaming from multiple cuts, but she was conscious. The first words out of her mouth weren't about her own pain. "My baby. Is my baby okay?" she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Roman, this 10-year-old boy who had just risked his life for a stranger, looked down at her with eyes far too mature for his age. "You're both gonna be fine. I promise. Help is coming." The paramedics arrived within minutes, but Roman refused to leave Cassie's side. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, he climbed into the ambulance with her, holding her hand and talking to keep her conscious during the race to the hospital. "What's your name?" Cassie asked weakly. "Roman Taylor. What's yours?" "Cassie Lane." "Roman. That's a strong name for a strong boy." At the hospital, the medical team rushed Cassie into emergency surgery. She had lost massive amounts of blood, and her condition was critical. Roman sat in the waiting room, his clothes still smoky and his hands bandaged, refusing to leave until he knew she was okay. That's when he overheard the conversation that would change everything. "She needs an immediate transfusion," Dr. Martinez was saying to a nurse. "But she has an AB negative blood type. We're completely out, and it's 2 a.m. The blood bank won't have any until morning." "What does that mean?" the nurse asked. "It means she's going to die without it. AB negative is the rarest blood type. Only about 1% of the population has it. We need to find a donor, and we need to find one now." Roman's heart stopped. He remembered his last medical checkup at the free clinic when the nurse had mentioned something about his blood type being unusual. He'd written it down in his notebook because he thought it sounded important. Without hesitation, Roman approached Dr. Martinez. "Doctor, I heard you need AB negative blood. That's what I have." Dr. Martinez looked down at this small, scruffy boy with concern. "Son, you're just a child. We'd need multiple units of blood. It's too dangerous." Roman's voice was steady and determined. "She saved my life before I even met her. Let me save hers." The medical team was amazed. Here was a homeless child, someone who had every reason to look out only for himself, willing to risk his own life to save a stranger. After checking his medical records and confirming his blood type, they agreed to let him donate. As Roman lay on the hospital bed, giving his blood to save Cassie's life, something remarkable happened. The nurse noticed that he was wearing a simple silver bracelet, identical to one that Cassie was wearing. She mentioned it was unusual for a child to have such a rare blood type, especially one so young. But Roman was focused on only one thing: making sure the woman who had somehow touched his heart would live to see another day. He had no idea that the blood flowing from his veins into hers was more than just a medical miracle. It was the blood of a son saving his mother's life. All he knew was that this woman needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it. In that moment, a homeless boy with nothing to his name became the hero who would save 2 lives, his mother's and his sister's, without even knowing who they truly were. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows as Cassie Lane slowly opened her eyes. The monitors around her bed showed stable vital signs. She had survived the night. More importantly, so had her unborn daughter. The doctors had confirmed that baby Emma was safe, her tiny heartbeat strong and steady despite the trauma. Sitting beside her bed looking exhausted but wearing a gentle smile was Roman Taylor. The 15-year-old boy who had given his blood to save her life was pale from the donation, but his eyes were bright with relief. He had refused to leave her side all night, despite the nurse's attempts to get him to rest. "What's your name, Angel?" Cassie whispered, her voice still weak but filled with gratitude. "Roman Taylor." "You're gonna be okay now," he replied, his young voice carrying a maturity that seemed far beyond his years. Cassie's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this remarkable child who had risked everything for a stranger. "You saved us both, Roman." Then something caught her attention. The silver bracelet on his wrist. It was identical to hers, down to the smallest detail. "That bracelet, where did you get it?" Roman unconsciously touched the simple piece of jewelry, his most precious possession. "I've had it since I was born, the only thing I got from my real mama." For a moment, Cassie felt something stir deep in her heart. A recognition she couldn't quite explain. The identical bracelets, the rare blood type, the inexplicable bond she felt with this boy. But before she could process these feelings, the moment was shattered. Two social workers entered the room, their clipboards and stern expressions immediately changing the atmosphere. "Roman Taylor? We're here to take you back to your foster placement. You shouldn't have left without permission." Roman's face went white with panic. In his young mind, he had done something wrong by helping Cassie. Foster kids learned early that any deviation from the rules could mean trouble, and trouble could mean being moved to an even worse situation. "I didn't do anything wrong," Roman protested, backing away from the social workers. "I just helped her." "Roman, wait!" Cassie called out, trying to sit up in her hospital bed. But she was too weak, too wounded to move quickly. In a flash of terror, Roman bolted from the room. He ran through the hospital corridors, his small feet pounding against the linoleum floors, past confused nurses and patients, until he disappeared into the maze of the city streets. Cassie tried desperately to follow, but her injuries and the IV lines kept her trapped in that bed. "Find him," she called the nurses. "Please, find that boy." But Roman Taylor had vanished into the urban landscape that had been his home for so long. He was gone, and with him went the only clue to a mystery that would haunt Cassie for the next 15 years. From that day forward, two parallel lives began, lives that should have been intertwined but were instead separated by a cruel twist of fate. Cassie Lane returned to her wealthy family's mansion with baby Emma. But she was forever changed. The trauma of the accident had awakened something in her. A fierce determination and an unexplainable obsession with finding the boy who had saved her life. She threw herself into building a tech company, using her privilege and resources to create something meaningful. But late at night, when the business world was quiet, she would hold Emma close and tell her about the angel who had saved them both. "Mommy, will we ever see him again?" Emma would ask. "I hope so, sweetheart, I hope so." Cassie hired private investigators, spending thousands of dollars trying to track down Roman Taylor. She posted his description on missing persons websites, contacted every social services agency in the state, and even hired hackers to search through foster care databases. But Roman seemed to have vanished completely from the system. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, because what happens next will absolutely amaze you. Meanwhile, Roman's life took a drastically different path. He bounced from foster home to foster home, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. Some families were kind, but overwhelmed. Others saw him as just another paycheck from the state. A few were outright abusive, treating him like an unwanted burden. Through it all, Roman kept two things close to his heart: the silver bracelet that connected him to a past he couldn't remember, and a worn notebook filled with architectural drawings. Even in the worst situations, he would sketch buildings and dream of a future where he could create something beautiful and permanent. The system failed him repeatedly. At 16, he was placed with a family who locked him in a basement room and used his monthly stipend for drugs. At 17, he lived with foster parents who worked him like a slave, forcing him to do construction work and keeping all his earnings. But Roman never gave up. He attended community college classes at night, studying architecture and engineering. He worked construction jobs during the day, his small frame growing stronger as he learned to handle tools and materials. Every dollar he earned went toward his education and his dream of becoming an architect. By 18, he had aged out of the foster system completely. Most kids in his situation ended up on the streets, in prison, or worse. But Roman Taylor was different. He had been forged by hardship into something unbreakable. He rented a tiny studio apartment, barely bigger than a closet, and continued working construction while finishing his degree. He still wore the silver bracelet every day, and he still carried that notebook everywhere he went. Sometimes late at night, he would think about the pregnant woman he had saved years ago and wonder if she and her baby were okay. What Roman didn't know was that the woman he had saved was thinking about him too. Every single day. What do you think drove Roman to keep going despite facing such incredible hardships? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Cassie's tech company, Lane Innovations, became hugely successful. She revolutionized data security systems and built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But success couldn't fill the void left by the missing boy who had saved her life. She created a foundation that helped at-risk youth, hoping that somehow, some way, Roman might benefit from her programs. Emma grew up hearing stories about her mysterious savior. She became passionate about helping homeless children, volunteering at shelters and youth centers, unknowingly following in the footsteps of the brother she had never met. 15 years passed. Cassie Lane became one of the most successful businesswomen in the country, but she never stopped looking for Roman Taylor. Roman, now 25, had become a skilled architect and construction worker, but he never forgot the pregnant woman whose life he had saved. Neither of them knew that fate was about to bring them together again in the most unexpected way. And when that moment came, it would reveal a truth so shocking, so emotionally devastating, that it would change everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The boy who had saved his mother's life was about to discover that the woman he had rescued was the same person who had been grieving his supposed death for 15 years. And Cassie was about to learn that the son she thought had died at birth had actually been the angel who had saved her life. But first, they had to find each other again. Emma Lane had grown into a compassionate teenager who carried her mother's story in her heart. At 15, she was beautiful, intelligent, and driven by an unshakable desire to help others, especially homeless children. Every weekend, she volunteered at the downtown shelter, serving meals and organizing activities for kids who reminded her of the mysterious boy who had saved her life. Emma never knew that her passion for helping homeless youth was actually leading her toward the most important discovery of her life. On a cold Saturday morning, Emma was sorting donated clothes at the shelter when she noticed a man helping serve breakfast. He was tall now, with kind eyes and gentle hands, but there was something about his presence that felt familiar. He moved with purpose, treating every person with dignity and respect, and the homeless children gravitated toward him like he was their big brother. This was Roman Taylor, now exactly 30 years old. He had never forgotten the pregnant woman he had saved, and giving back to his community had become his way of honoring that memory. He volunteered at the shelter every weekend, using his construction skills to fix broken things and his gentle nature to comfort broken spirits. As Emma watched Roman help a young boy tie his shoes, something caught her eye. On Roman's wrist was a silver bracelet, simple, worn, but somehow significant. She couldn't explain why, but she felt compelled to take a photo of it with her phone. Later that evening, Emma showed her mother the picture. "Mom, I met this guy at the shelter today. He was so kind to everyone, and look at this bracelet he was wearing." The moment Cassie saw the photo, her world stopped. The bracelet was identical to hers. Not similar, but identical. Down to the smallest scratch and imperfection. Her hands began to shake as 15 years of searching suddenly crystallized into this one moment. "Emma," Cassie whispered, her voice barely audible, "I need you to tell me everything about this man. Everything." That night, Cassie made a phone call that would change everything. She contacted Felix Rodriguez, the private investigator who had been searching for Roman for 15 years. But this time, she had a lead that couldn't be ignored. "Felix, I need you to find out everything you can about a man named Roman Taylor. He's exactly 30 years old, volunteers at the downtown shelter, and he's wearing a bracelet identical to mine. I think he might be the boy who saved my life." Within 48 hours, Felix had uncovered information that would shatter everything Cassie thought she knew about her past. Roman's birth records showed he was born on the exact same day that Cassie's son had supposedly died. His blood type was AB negative, the same rare type that had saved Cassie's life. And most shocking of all, he had been delivered by Dr. Richard Hayes, the same doctor who had told Cassie her son had died. But Felix dug deeper, and what he found was even more disturbing. Dr. Richard Hayes had been running an illegal adoption ring for years, selling babies to wealthy families and telling the birth mothers that their children had died. He had been exposed in a massive scandal 3 years earlier and was now serving time in federal prison. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but Cassie needed to hear the truth from the man who had destroyed her family. The state penitentiary was cold and gray, matching the emptiness in Cassie's heart as she sat across from Dr. Richard Hayes. The man who had delivered her son was older now, his hair gray and his face lined with the weight of his crimes. But his eyes still held the same coldness that had allowed him to steal babies from their mothers. "I know what you did," Cassie said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "I know about the adoption ring. I know you stole babies and sold them. But I need to know about my son, Roman Taylor. What did you do to him?" Dr. Hayes looked at her for a moment, recognizing the woman whose life he had destroyed 30 years ago. Finally, he spoke. "You want the truth? Fine. Your son didn't die. I told you he died because I needed the money. I had gambling debts, and wealthy families paid top dollar for healthy babies. I sold your son to the Taylors, but they couldn't handle him and gave him up to the system when he was 5. Cassie's world exploded. 30 years of grief, of believing her son was dead, of building a life around that devastating loss. All of it had been a lie. "The boy who saved your life 15 years ago," Dr. Hayes continued with cruel satisfaction. "That was your son. The blood that kept you alive came from your own child. Ironic, isn't it?" Cassie left the prison in a daze, her mind reeling from the revelation. Roman Taylor, the homeless boy who had risked his life to save her, who had given his blood to keep her alive, was her son. Her son, who had suffered through foster care, homelessness, and abandonment while she had been living in luxury, never knowing he was alive. The next day, Cassie drove to the construction site where Roman worked. She sat in her car for an hour, watching this 30-year-old man who carried himself with such dignity despite everything he had endured. He was directing a crew, his voice calm and authoritative, wearing a hard hat and work boots but still carrying that silver bracelet on his wrist. Finally, Cassie found the courage to approach him. "Roman," she called out, her voice trembling. He turned around, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Roman's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was trying to place her face. "Do I know you?" he asked. "You look familiar." Cassie took a deep breath, knowing that the next words out of her mouth would change both their lives forever. "You saved my life 15 years ago with your blood. But what you don't know is, you saved your mother's life. I'm your mother, Roman. They told me you died at birth, but you were stolen from me. You're my son." Roman's face went white. The tools in his hands fell to the ground with a clatter. He staggered backward, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. That's impossible," he whispered. "My mother is dead. They told me she died when I was born." Cassie pulled out the DNA test results she had ordered after discovering the truth. With shaking hands, she held them out to him. 99.9% match, she said, tears streaming down her face. "Roman, I've been looking for you for 30 years. I never stopped believing you were alive. And when you saved my life that night, you were saving your own mother. The blood that kept me alive was the same blood that flowed through your veins because you came from me." Roman stared at the test results, his entire world crumbling and rebuilding simultaneously. The pregnant woman he had saved, the one who had haunted his dreams for 15 years, was his mother. The woman who had supposedly died giving birth to him was standing right in front of him, very much alive. "You're telling me," Roman said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "that I've been alone my whole life while my mother was alive? That I've been searching for a family while my family was searching for me?" Cassie nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Roman looked down at the silver bracelet on his wrist, the only thing he had ever had from his real mama. Then he looked at Cassie's wrist, where an identical bracelet caught the sunlight. "The bracelets," he said in wonder, "they match because I put one on you the day you were born," Cassie finished. "I kept the other one, hoping someday I'd see you again. I never took it off, not once in 30 years. The construction site faded away around them as mother and son stood facing each other, 30 years of separation and pain finally coming to an end. Roman had spent his entire life feeling like something was missing, never knowing that the missing piece was standing right in front of him. The homeless boy who had saved a pregnant woman's life had just discovered that he had saved his own mother, and the woman who had built an empire while searching for her lost son had found him in the most miraculous way possible. But their journey was far from over. Now they had to figure out how to build a relationship, how to heal from decades of separation, and how to become the family they had always been meant to be. The DNA test results were just a formality. Both Roman and Cassie already knew the truth in their hearts. But when that official document confirmed what seemed impossible, it unleashed a torrent of emotions that 30 years of separation had kept buried. Roman stood in Cassie's living room, holding the test results with trembling hands. The paper that proved he was her son felt both weightless and heavier than anything he had ever carried. His mind reeled with overwhelming feelings he couldn't sort through. Anger at a system that had failed him, joy at finally finding his mother, confusion about who he really was after 30 years of believing he was an orphan. "I don't understand," Roman said, his voice breaking. "How do I process this? I've spent my entire life thinking I was alone, that nobody wanted me, and now you're telling me that my mother, my actual mother, was looking for me the whole time?" Cassie approached him carefully, as if he might disappear again. "Roman, I never stopped looking, not for one single day. I hired investigators. I contacted every agency. I posted on every website. I would have given everything I owned to find you." But Roman was wrestling with something even more profound. As the reality settled in, he realized something that took his breath away. "That night, 15 years ago, when I gave you my blood, I literally gave my life force to save my own mother. I didn't know it, but some part of me recognized you. Some part of me knew I had to protect you." Cassie's eyes filled with tears as she understood what he was saying. "Even as a child, even when you didn't know who I was, you were protecting me. It was a son's instinct, the deepest kind of love that exists, even when memory fails." The moment was interrupted by footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared, having heard voices from her room. At 15, she had inherited her mother's compassion and her brother's strength, though she didn't know Roman was her brother yet. "Mom, is everything okay? I heard." Emma stopped mid-sentence when she saw Roman standing in their living room, still holding the DNA test results. Cassie took a deep breath. "Emma, I need you to sit down. This is going to be hard to believe, but this is Roman Taylor. He's not just the man who saved our lives 15 years ago. He's your brother. My son. Your older brother." Emma stared at Roman, her mind struggling to process this revelation. The man she had met at the shelter, the one who had been so kind to the homeless children, was her brother. The hero from her mother's bedtime stories was standing right in front of her. "You're my brother?" Emma whispered. Roman nodded, still overwhelmed by everything he was learning. "I guess I am." Without hesitation, Emma crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Roman. "I always wondered what it would be like to have a big brother. I used to imagine that the boy who saved us would come back someday." For the first time in 30 years, Roman felt what it was like to be truly hugged by family. The walls he had built around his heart began to crumble as he held his sister close. The road to healing wasn't easy. Roman struggled with anger, at Dr. Hayes, at the system, at the families who had given up on him. He wrestled with questions about his identity and his place in this wealthy world he had never known. Some days, he felt like he didn't belong in Cassie's mansion, that he was too damaged by his past to fit into their life. But Cassie was patient. She understood that 30 years of trauma couldn't be healed overnight. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, filling in the gaps of their lost time. Emma helped bridge the distance between them, her youthful energy and unconditional love creating a safe space for them to reconnect. "I don't want your charity," Roman told Cassie one evening as they sat in her garden. "I need to earn my place in this family. I need to know that I'm here because I belong, not because you feel guilty." Cassie smiled, recognizing the strength and pride that had kept her son alive through his darkest moments. "What did you have in mind?" Roman pulled out his worn notebook, filled with architectural drawings and plans he had worked on for years. "I want to build something that will help other families like ours. I want to create a foundation that helps separated families find each other and exposes the corruption that tears families apart." Together, they began planning something that would honor their journey and help others avoid the pain they had endured. The Taylor Lane Foundation would focus on family reunification, supporting private investigators who specialized in finding missing children, and advocating for reforms in the foster care system. But Roman wanted more than just a foundation. He wanted justice. Working with Cassie's resources and his own determination, Roman became the star witness in a massive investigation that exposed the full extent of Dr. Hayes' crimes. Dozens of families who had been told their children died discovered that their babies had actually been sold. The investigation led to the conviction of several other doctors and administrators who had participated in the illegal adoption ring. Roman's testimony was powerful and heartbreaking. He spoke about the years of foster care, the abuse, the loneliness, and the way the system had failed him over and over again. But he also spoke about hope, about the love that had sustained him, and about the importance of never giving up on family. "Dr. Hayes didn't just steal babies," Roman told the court. "He stole our childhoods, our sense of identity, our families. But he couldn't steal our capacity to love. That's something that survives even when everything else is taken away." The case made national headlines, and Roman became an advocate for foster care reform, while also pursuing his architectural dreams. He enrolled in graduate school, working toward his master's degree in architecture, while designing buildings for the foundation. 1 year after their reunion, Roman, Cassie, and Emma stood together at the groundbreaking ceremony for their first family reunification center. The building, designed by Roman himself, would house private investigators, social workers, and counselors who specialized in helping separated families find each other. Roman, wearing a hard hat and work boots, placed the first brick with hands that had once been cut by broken glass while saving his mother's life. Those same hands now built hope for other families. Cassie stepped up to the podium, her voice strong and clear as she addressed the crowd of supporters, media, and families who had been helped by their foundation. 30 years ago, I thought I lost my son forever. Instead, he was out there becoming the hero who would literally give his blood to save me. Today, we're not just building a center. We're building bridges between broken families and the love that never dies. Roman took the microphone next, his voice filled with emotion, but steady with purpose. Sometimes the longest journey home is the one that leads you back to love. But that journey is always worth taking, no matter how long it takes or how difficult it becomes. Finally, Emma stepped forward with the ceremonial ribbon and scissors. At 16 now, she had become a passionate advocate for children's rights, inspired by her brother's story and her mother's determination. And sometimes heroes are born from the deepest love, even when that love is forgotten, Emma said as she cut the ribbon. Love finds a way, even when everything else fails. The crowd erupted in applause as the ribbon fell away, officially opening the Taylor Lane Family Reunification Center. But for Roman, Cassie, and Emma, this wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of what was possible when love refuses to give up. As the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, the three of them stood together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of hope. They had lost 30 years, but they had found each other. They had endured separation, but they had created unity. They had survived the worst that life could throw at them, but they had emerged stronger and more determined to help others. Roman looked at the silver bracelet on his wrist, no longer the only thing he had from his real mama, but now a symbol of the love that had always connected them, even when they didn't know it existed. The homeless boy who saved a pregnant woman's life had discovered that he had saved his own mother. The woman who had built an empire while searching for her lost son had found him in the most miraculous way possible. And together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance. They're about family, about the bonds that can't be broken even when they're forgotten, and about the courage to keep believing in miracles even when the world tells you to give up hope. Roman, Cassie, and Emma had proven that no matter how far apart life takes you, love always finds a way home. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that miracles can happen and that love really does find a way, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because there are more incredible stories of hope, resilience, and the power of the human spirit coming your way.